please welcome to the stage Director of Engineering at Helix, Max Rolon.
Hey everybody, how's everyone doing? Oh, good. Okay, so I'm Max, and I'm the Director of Engineering at Helix. I've been in agency for more than a decade, and I've been working with Shopify for most of that time. First off, a little bit about me. I got married 8 days ago, so it's been a crazy couple of weeks. Thank you. I'm based in New York, but I'm originally from Australia, if you couldn't tell, from a little country town about 2.5 hours from Sydney called Robertson, known for potatoes. We have a big potato in the middle of town. It's pretty gross. And it's also where the movie about the little pig, Babe, was filmed. So it's great to be here. It was at the 2018 Unite conference that I met Peter, the founder of Helix. And it's interesting because ultimately that landed me the job of Director of Engineering. At Helix, we are a growing agency that works exclusively with Shopify and almost exclusively with large Plus merchants. We primarily work on custom-built front ends and back ends, and we don't really customize pre-made themes too much. Over the years, we've worked with some pretty niche business requirements for a range of brands, which you can see. Before I get started, I just want to give a shout out to my team. I couldn't say anything today without mentioning that I'm working with a great, highly talented team from a wide range of front-end and back-end kind of considerations and histories, also quite a few from Shopify itself. And nothing that I'll be sharing today comes from just me, but all of us at Helix. This slide is at our offsite this year in Puerto Escondido. It was a good time. So this talk will be broken into 3 parts: online store and 2.0, headless, and hybrid. It's going to get a little technical, but we won't get too carried away. And before I kind of move forward, I just want to get a show of hands. Who's actually interacting with themes, online store 2.0 themes? A lot of people. Sweet. Okay. So this is our perspective as a single partner that has been interacting and engaging with some of the 2.0 landscapes and some of the changes that have happened over the last 18 months. So first, we'll take a dive into the online store channel, taking a targeted look at 2.0. Then we won't go deep into headless, because this is not a talk about headless, but we want to talk about the relationship between online store 2.0 and headless, since it's a conversation that we have with most of our clients. And then when headless or hybrid is not the perfect fit, we're going to talk about our concept of hybrid, which we draw to for these clients. And these 3 approaches illustrate the avenues or the strategies that we use to ultimately guide our clients on front-end builds. So a bit of empathy, let's have a look at where we came from over the last 8 years. This is going to be familiar for some of the veteran theme developers out there, and we'll refer back to this timeline later on. You might notice that as partners, we've maybe gone in a kind of cycle of sorts. So, in 2014, ThemeKit was introduced to help watch and deploy standard theme files. As a baseline, things were pretty simple. Then, around 2017, Slate was introduced on top of ThemeKit, and tooling like Webpack or Babel were introduced out of the box, and non-standard directory structures like a source directory was encouraged. Then in 2019, things started to adapt and change. Community tools really started to shine, and then a lot of them iterated on the philosophies of Slate. We introduced our own Helix kit, which was heavily based upon Webpack, and then a couple years later, Shopify CLI and 2.0 were introduced, and ultimately we started to move away from some of the partner experiences of Slate's principles, particularly from deeper deviations in theme structure or a preference on mutated bundled code. So with this in mind, now we're going to take a look at the online store and take a deeper dive into 2.0. So 2.0 has allowed us to have increased flexibility and enables a Shopify-managed, upgraded developer experience. It allows partners, such as us, to not manage our own tooling or complex scripts, which really is a plus, particularly helps with developer onboarding, where we don't have to write custom documentation. We can say, hey, look at the Shopify docs. So we believe also that the concepts introduced, namely HTML and CSS over JavaScript, do have a tangible benefit to performance, accessibility, and, in that landscape, customer experience. It helps partners like us add value to our merchants, which, we're a business, ultimately helps us retain our clients. So this new ecosystem has had a large impact to developer experience, and something that I kind of want to empathize with today. We now have to consider JSON templates. We have articulate best practices that are introduced, and as partners, we like to abide by them. And we see the expression of these in Dawn. We also have new development methods like the GitHub sync that have come into the ecosystem that we dove into and we wanted to get the most out of. So taking a look at that original timeline, I'm just going to touch upon half Helix timelines of front-end development. So back in 2016, we were using very simple approaches to development. We used ThemeKit, Gulp, and if anyone remembers Browserify, we used Browserify. jQuery was used alongside traditional SaaS. Things were pretty standard. Then in 2019, we made a big departure. We used a heavy use of Vue.js, and we got really excited about state-based management. We used Vuex to manage data and state. And we got quite articulate with our SaaS best practices, and we kind of made it all flat, and we adhered to some BEM principles, if anyone's familiar with BEM. We used Webpack via Half Helix Kit. We had a pretty custom theme directory structure, and we grouped CSS, JavaScript, and Liquid together. We had our own opinions, and actually, when 2021 came around, we had to be like, whoa, we need to make a change if we want to get the most out of these developer tools and these new philosophies. So we made a real-time kind of change, and for a lot of our projects that were happening at that time, we quickly moved to kind of shift and change and do things like remove Vue, reimagine the role of build processes, reimagine SaaS and actually remove it. And then we eagerly adopted GitHub Sync because we work with Netlify, we work with Headless sites. We really like this kind of interbinding between a GitHub repository and ultimately a deployment destination. All right, before we get into the strategies, we just want to mention some of the clients that we've launched over this timeline. And we're going to start off with Ulla Johnson. So Ulla Johnson is a client we worked with for a number of years, and it was developed with the kind of 2016 best practices in mind, leveraging jQuery and SaaS. Code was ultimately quite simple. We used jQuery plugins, and we used also the wider NPM ecosystem. For things like scroll-based animations, as you kind of go down the page, we iterated over the site for a number of years, and it's been quite important for us because it's often unorganically referred to by new leads in our sales cycles. It's still coming around. It's still kind of a source of new biz. And for us, it illustrates that a successful site can still use simple practices, and this simplicity can be more efficient to maintain. And then as another example, we launched the Peloton Apparel site, which is a high-traffic site and ultimately a highly visible launch. This time, we used Vue.js, and we used Vuex to manage state. We kind of ordered the code via modules, really kind of mapped to sections before 2.0 was introduced. And ultimately, it was kind of like a landscape of highly portable and reusable modules that we use in many parts of the site. And then with 2.0, we launched Marlow. It was our first online store 2.0 build. It launched in November 2021. And anyone that knows timelines, it means that we had to pivot in real time as that project was going along. So we kind of thought about it in one way, and then the release, and we're like, OK, well, we need to change this. And so we pivoted. We used Dawn heavily to guide our decisions on what online store 2.0 development looked like. And the projects like this allowed us to form our own opinions on what clean 2.0 custom development looks like. And what that also meant was, as I kind of alluded to, we didn't use Vue. And for those using React, we're not using those abstractions. We're using vanilla CSS, and we're doing this with accessibility in mind to make some of these conversations with clients easier, and also for ethical reasons as well. So let's have a look at some of the strategies that we use today. And we're going to start off with just a couple of call-outs to design. So now, for us, the concept of a page is less important than it was. Files are a landscape, so our Figma files are a landscape of components and modules. And pages exist for client approval, for development, and design aids, so that we can see how modules kind of stitch together. Ultimately, 95% of our development time is now on these modules, and many of those modules map to sections. We use snippets, but we use them in kind of like a headless way or a compositional way. When I say headless, I mean a Google schema markup file or compositional to help with standardizing the way that icons are rendered onto the page, or the way that text inputs are rendered onto the page. And for most clients, we develop a style guide to represent how these modules might be presented so that our clients know what they have available to stitch together their JSON templates. The other thing that's been interesting is that we feel like we can build out custom themes that are truer, highly repersable modular systems. These are themes that clients come to us to build as custom, but ultimately the theme adds the most value being used in highly dynamic ways for multiple brands. So think about a holding company that wants to have one theme and still apply it to multiple sub-brands that they might have under their institution. Or a brand that really presents themselves in different ways internationally, and they need to really express their brand, to different markets in different ways. And in these kind of use cases, the flexibility of JSON templates has added ultimately a huge amount of value. Now on to technology. So first thing that I want to talk about is this kind of like landscape of Greenfield technology, because we do believe in it. And we see that over the last 5 years, the landscape of browser support has changed. 95% of users have access to modern APIs without the use of transpilers like Babel that often conflate and mutate our code. So for us at Half Helix, we consider the MVP experience, but we optimize our process and our technical decisions for the 95%. Babel, Webpack are just no longer part of our process, and we have optimized our QA and SOWs to really focus on this expression of the site in modern browsers. And some of the things that we're excited about and we've gone live with for a number of clients is, first off, web components, which we like when we kind of compare it to Vue or React in the way that they seamlessly integrate with the vanilla DOM and progressively enhance the site. This helps with third parties that might have their own render pipelines, or using kind of modern updates to the Shopify platform like the section rendering API, which returns you back to HTML. We're excited about JavaScript modules in browser. So what I mean is import and export statements that you can use without the use of a bundler. And we're using AS 2015. It's a bit, it's a bit old, but I say with a plus, standards of JavaScript like arrow functions directly in browser, because we feel like it increases readability. We're also really excited about an open source platform or framework called Lit. If you haven't heard it, check it out. It's a Google thing, which helps us write what we think is clean, modern web components and help with data binding, lifecycle functions, encapsulated shadow DOM that can be styled. It provides a really nice developer experience. And you can use things like template literals, again, check it out, to help with this render and this styling. So as I said, build processes are no longer part of they no longer play a major role. Builds are seen as an enhancement and not a backbone. Most of our files and our themes don't leverage it, and we tend to compile and not transpile. Shout out to ESBuild. It's just an example, but we're really looking at using build processes that put a preference on a speedy developer experience rather than feature richness. Again, because what we want out of a build system is really there to help, for example, keep our files small and readable, or help manage things like dependencies where, if we don't have something that maybe taps into NPM, we're looking at, using dependencies just through CDNs, or even worse, putting it into, copy and pasting it directly into a theme file, into a repository. For us, CSS, we try and keep it pure. So CSS variables are pretty deeply adopted in the way that we approach theming now. And we see it as really powerful, particularly when overridden by media queries. This is something that I kind of have been exposed to over the last 18 months in a way that I hadn't been before. But you can have one CSS variable, and then in a media query, you can override that value. And it makes it much easier to do things like topography systems and keep them dry, where there might be different sizes for mobile and desktop. The other interesting thing about CSS variables is that they can be consumed in a web component shadow DOM, which also helps keep systems dry. And that is, when we think about, we like Tailwind. I love Tailwind. It's different to using just CSS classes where global scope and encapsulated scope are different things. We continue to have a lightweight implementation of BEM, and we couple that with a framework of utility classes that is, it's pretty much used, and it's the same on almost every project. no longer use SaaS. And we really try and keep our files small and not have just a big, long base system. We try and group it and, found that if you have the bigger the file, the more there's like redundancy and the harder it is to navigate. Deployment. So 18 months ago, as I said, we dove right into GitHub Sync, and 18 months later, we have some experiences and some learnings. And ultimately, for each of our clients, we take two approaches. We take either an API deployment in a CI/CD context, or we go with the GitHub Sync tool. And this kind of changes a little bit with a 1.0 or 2.0 theme. Some of the things that we look for are, does content need to be scheduled? And if it does, it needs to use something like Launchpad, how so? Will code and content coupling by way of repository branches actually get in the way of how a marketing team iterates? Because now this content coupling, is a consideration. This kind of the relationship with a developer and a marketing team, and the way that a branch might seek to a theme is an area that needs to be navigated, particularly for larger merchants. And then the other thing is, what is the expansion store approach, and how does it play in content? Does content need to be represented in different ways across the globe? And if so, we kind of more lean into the API-based approach. Sometimes that kind of repository, using the repository branches can, be a little challenging. So that's just our experience. We like the GitHub Sync tool. We think it's got some great value. But there is a fantastic Shopify API, and we've been using API-based deployments for so long, and it's still a solution that we draw to. So let's talk about Headless. Headless can be extremely powerful, and I'm a developer, and I love headless experiences. But I also love well-designed online store development patterns, particularly using exciting things like Greenfield technology and, say, a fast developer reload. So as a partner, we have a responsibility to clearly guide our merchants in this in Headless and taking Headless online store, because it is a really important decision that we should get right from the get-go. We have a matrix of 15 lenses that ultimately allow us to guide this conversation with the client. And we don't see Headless or 2.0 as good or bad if the right decision is made. I'm going to pull out 3 different lenses out of this 15. So first, we look at initial budget, the appetite for platform costs, and the appetite for retained services. There is more flexibility, but with this flexibility, often more lines of code need to be written and maintained over time. More platforms are required to allow business to function. With the release of the content platform, which we're excited about, this can start to change and shift. And we also see that integrations with third parties can take more time. And again, as more people adopt Hydrogen, we're hoping that this changes and shifts as well. We look at the richness of the required feature set and the roadmap. Will complexity be expressed in a more impactfully maintainable way within a headless environment? And will adding too much complexity within a Shopify theme actually become a maintenance burden over time, which we've seen as well? And then we look at content. Will the front end interplay rich storytelling with product purchase? And does content deviate dramatically from these concepts of product, variant, page, and blog? Sanity, Storyblock, and Contentful allow content to be architected in almost any way. And modern tools out there allow data to be synced between Shopify and third-party CMSs. Again, shout out to the new content platform. But information architecture becomes a bigger part of the process and something that needs to be considered in the way that we approach SOWs and timelines. Other considerations that we look at are typically more client training is required, something that can be forgotten at times. And Headless does work really well with larger client teams, particularly client teams that have dev in-house or technical leadership in-house. There are also sometimes enterprise access or security considerations. Maybe there's some constraints that doesn't allow certain content to be put into the same e-commerce cart. We also kind of have a look at how does content deviate internationally and how does it slot cleanly into Shopify markets. Sometimes bigger brands with bigger globalization strategies need that flexibility of a headless landscape. What about performance? So performance is a part of the conversation, and there are some objective benefits to going headless. There's also some pretty interesting innovation in the field, particularly now with Hydrogen using the Suspense Streaming API to speed up server-side render. But we see some of these things as factors into web core vital metrics, but not the full story. Headless has some of its downsides as well, such as heavy JS download, which is a conversation point because Online Store 2.0 is really trying to make limited use of JavaScript, and large third-party dependencies play into both headless and online store approaches. Ultimately, we see it as a lens and a conversation, but not as a guiding decision maker for our clients. Now we're going to talk about a current client where we feel like headless makes sense, or we know that headless makes sense. We built this project and have managed it for a number of years at this point. And that site is The Cravings by Chrissy Teigen. This site relies heavily on the ease of navigation between products and recipes. We have an admin experience and user experience that solves for this using Contentful without the need for workarounds or complicated meta fields. And we've got the most out of some of the CMS features within Contentful, like focus points for Shop the Look, which we have a little point on the screen there with it showing. And we feel like this richness of content ultimately made Headless a great fit for Cravings. All right, last we're going to talk about this hybrid approach. And so this is what we come to when neither Online Store 2.0 or Headless is the right approach for a client. And we use hybrid lightly. For us, it means that the ultimate SOW is fulfilled through the use of an Online Store 2.0 theme and a headless Jamstack bundle. Often this can be most impactful for clients that have a few complex features, but the majority of the site is satisfied with an Online Store 2.0 build. Jamstack enables these few features to be architected and maintained really well. Maybe getting the most out of Vue.js or React. Maybe you want to integrate TypeScript in there, host it on a CDN, use Tailwind, while also getting the most out of that online store channel, which does have some maintenance and it has some maintenance advantages, and it's allows people that are familiar with Liquid to maintain that theme over time. So when have we used a hybrid approach? We've used it to enable a multi-cart flow in cart. We've used it to enable deep product customization experiences. We've used it for custom quizzes or custom carts that might need to integrate with custom APIs. And we used it for account functionality or customer dashboarding needs, for, say, a subscription client. And our case study here is an interesting one. It's for a company called K2 Awards, which is one of the biggest trophy merchants in the US. The requirements worked really well with an online store channel, but there was a complex product customizer that we needed to fulfill for. This customizer had a real-time visual preview. It had multiple layers that need to be managed within the browser. It had different font styles that we needed to skin fonts with. It had image upload and editing, including masking, and it had drop and drag functionality that we needed to solve for. It needed to be viewable in a 72 DPI browser, but then also the same technology needed to export to a vector PDF to be sent right to an etching printer. Pretty complex. And so we handled this customizer in a Vue.js application, built the rest of the theme in an online store theme, and we integrated the two with a pretty articulate API of events, options, and methods. So in conclusion, what I'd say is lean into the 2.0 ecosystem. We do feel like it's an exciting space. We feel like solid systems and an enjoyable, efficient, low-maintenance developer experience are possible. We believe in build processes still, but they need to be used carefully, and they do not need to be completely removed, at least for us. In terms of Headless, online store needs to be invalidated before we recommend Headless for our clients. Headless should be a careful, articulate decision made collaboratively with the client, since it's an important decision. And then with hybrid can be a powerful solution for certain clients with some features that are complex, but primarily satisfied through the online store theme. Thanks. Go. Any questions?
Hi.
Hey.
I was wondering what your thoughts are on Oxygen, and if you would like to see Oxygen's deployment process kind of applied to the online store.
Yeah, I'm really excited about Oxygen. We've done a lot with Vercel and we've done a lot with Netlify, and there's been some particular price changes with some of those platforms that you might know. And we think that Oxygen could be really make the conversation with clients a lot easier to go headless, and also tapping into the GitHub kind of base deployment structure is something that a lot of our developers are familiar with, and so the barrier for entry is a really positive one. So we are looking to adopt it more and more, and we feel like it's again quite powerful.
So when you were talking about Headless, you mentioned Contentful, I think, because of the hotspots. I was just wondering how you guys choose which CMS. Is it kind of standardized at this point for you, or is it on a case-by-case basis?
It is case by case, but we've kind of narrowed down the vendor selection matrix to really put preference on 3 CMSs: Sanity, Contentful, and Storyblock. Storyblock has a visual representation of data that can be interesting for certain clients. Sanity has an innate amount of flexibility, particularly if you want to have a pretty robust admin experience, since you have that in its own repo. And then Contentful is a really well-known household name that clients also will be familiar with already. We've done some pretty big launches with all 3, and we feel like the 3 are all viable solutions. Cool. Yeah.
You mentioned that you try to invalidate Online Store 2.0 before Headless becomes part of the conversation. Do you have any kind of common requirements that kind of help jumpstart moving towards a headless conversation?
Yeah, so the easiest thing to look at often is the requirements around storytelling and content. This could honestly change with the new content modeling offering. But if we've done a lot with metafields over the years, and we know when having too many metafields on a page can be a pretty abrasive admin experience. Particularly for an enterprise level company that might be going from a platform where there's a different experience to something like metafields. And so that's the first thing that we look at. If the site as a whole is really doing some really complex things around e-commerce, we take that kind of product customizer idea and we apply it in like 4 or 5 different ways, and we say, well, maintaining 2 different systems is going to be verbose over time, then we might want to condense it into the single system that uses a headless expression of a front end. Just a couple of examples. Cool.
And in terms of different B2B, B2C, was there any interesting B2B use cases with headless?
Yeah, we actually haven't done a lot with B2B. We are working on a couple right now, and there are some B2B things that, for this one client that I'm not going to say, that has been easily satisfied within a headless experience. And it's come about with the bigger role that different user types have to play. Sometimes kind of B2C, B2B brands see customers in a little bit more of a robust way than you would with a D2C company. The idea, and again, the new B2B offering kind of has some work around organizations and groupings of customers, but there can be some deviations in that content model where having a headless site, maybe having serverless functions to satisfy some things might be a better expression of that brand. 2 more questions if we have any more.
Looking to the future, something along the lines of, we'll say, Shopify 3.0, are you expecting Shopify to drop storefront and focus a lot more on headless stuff? Or do you think it'll always have a place?
I think there's some information that was talked about in some of the talks yesterday that I think is really driving home that there's still a preference in online store-based development patterns, and I don't see that it's going to go away. I think that a lot of the benefits of Shopify is to really enable marketing teams to be able to progress really fast and not be held back by technology. And I think that Liquid is still a really good expression of that goal. And so I still think both of them are going to be an avenue and a decision to make over time for the foreseeable future. But I'm just talking about from a partner's perspective, obviously, and not from Shopify's perspective. One more question. All right, mate. Be kind, okay?
When you're approaching the hybrid approach of development, is there a particular reason you go with the Jamstack? And how do you guys actually approach that, merging of the headless and the storefront 2.0?
Yeah, so the kind of the flexibility of Jamstack is one of those big primary drivers. The componentization that you can do with React and the way that you can integrate systems. There is some flexibility considerations there that allow us to have more options to pull from as we're curating that decision-making process. We also have a development team that has experience in Jamstack and Liquid, and for us, it's kind of tapping into that mind share that we have within our institution already to ultimately bring the most value for the client. In terms of the way that they stitch together, we will go through a data kind of contracting component of our process where we might have a pod and a pod that ultimately unite via a consistent data contract of methods or instantiation objects or events that will talk to the two. And when I say events, I really do mean like browser native events that you might want to pass data from one part of the stack to the other. We create documentation, and even for some of these clients like K2, we publish that documentation as dedicated to that bundle, so that over time both pods can interact and work together in a seamless way. Cool. All right, guys. Thank you.